Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about The Bear, Season 3, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I thought the opening was so profound, especially how it kind of plays out in a lot of ways. I think it means a lot coming from like when it in relation to both Carmi and Marcus, but I think a lot of people too in general. But yeah, it's a moment between Carmen and Claire, and it's this conversation about which days they like. He likes Wednesdays because it means like, hey, the week is halfway over. She, ironically enough, likes Mondays. His least favorite day is Sundays because it's like, yeah, because that's when you got to think about the week. It's like the beginning of the week, and you just got to think about like, it's just the worst day because it's like, yeah, the full week that's ahead of me. And we finally talk about the scar on Carmi's hand. Someone had to correct me. I meant to talk about this in episode 1 because they focused on it. Didn't he reference that scar when he was talking to Richie in an episode? I don't know if that was like, I think that might have been episode 6 of season 1. But it was like when Richie was talking about how Tiff has him saved in her name as like Richie Bad News. I think it was in that same conversation he talked about like an accident. I think he said like he was messing around with Mikey or something. Because in this episode he says like, right, he grabbed a pot and it was a mistake and it burned his hand. And she's like, right, it's so deep, you must have been holding on to it. And she makes this whole point of, right, like, was it so, like, you didn't, like, for a while, it didn't hurt, so you didn't realize how bad it was. It's actually interesting, too, because, like, I was about to, like, get real worldish about, but I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. The parallel I was going to make, it's not important. I was hoping it was going to be something about my, real life scars conversation. I was like, I'm not going to do that. Either way, the point I was going to go into next was like Claire telling that story about like, right, there's this girl, 17-year-old, was at a party. Apparently she like tripped and fell into a glass table and got cut up bad. And it's actually really, I was kind of scared, and like, it was like the way Claire's like breaking down the story of she messed up and like the girl had a specific allergy to something she was going to give her like medication wise, and so they had to give her EpiPen, like an EpiPen type of situation, and she had to go through a whole bunch of surgeries and stuff. And it's like, it was pretty bad. Like she got cut up all over her back, her front, like she was just scarred up badly. And when it was all said and done, when she kind of woke up, because like Claire kind of felt so bad because it's like, right, my mistake had kind of like, because they were having a conversation too about he also hates what was it, Saturdays or Sundays or whatever, because he was like, that's when the restaurants close, and it's like you kind of get stuck with the quiet. Carmi likes the noise of everything because it allows him to not be in his own head, but obviously that's not even a foolproof band. It's a band-aid for like him trying to get outside of his head, but doesn't always work, which she understands, like, because she talks about like the chaos of like, you know, working as a, you know, in a hospital. She's like St. Patty's Day and St. Patty's Day and God, what was it? 4th of July are like the worst, because she had said like, right, take what is kind of like the worst time in a restaurant and multiply that by fucking hell, and it's like, yeah, you get kind of like the craziness of it. But either way, going back to it, Claire says that the girl had laughed, and Carmen was like, why was she laughing when she woke up? And it's like, because I guess she hadn't felt it yet. I was like, oh, that build up to that story and that line, you're like, oh, that's so good. And that's why I was saying, like, it fits so much with Carmi, where it's like, has it really hit him yet? It seems like he's going through the motions of it, but like I said, he's doing so much to kind of like, I think last episode might be a representation of that. It might be allegorical to not just Carmi going forward. I think it still can apply going forward, but I think it really hit him last episode too, where he was just like struck by everything, because it's like, right, you're trying to move forward because you haven't felt the pain yet. You're kind of going through the motions. You're like, it's seeping in a little bit, but you're kind of like, ignore that. Keep it pushing, keep it moving. And it's like last episode, I think it seeped in a lot more, especially nearing the end of the episode. But I think that's so, yeah, it is like he's not letting himself feel it yet because he hasn't felt it yet. And it won't happen until it fully rocks him, I think. And I don't know if it's fully rocked him yet, like just the aftermath of everything, you know? I mean, I guess arguably you even say like it's applicable to the season 2 finale, where it's just like after you heard Claire's like after everything, and then he heard Claire's voicemail. Before then is when the pain started coming in, and it really rocked him the moment he heard Claire say, "I love you." He throws his phone. Like it's just, I was like, that's such a good opening. But that's what I was saying. Like it's also applicable to Marcus. Like, has it really hurt Marcus? I think because he's feeling it a lot more, and he's kind of diving into it. Or that whole sequence where he's just like at it by his mom's bed, and there's the machine, and he turns it on just to hear it beep. It's kind of like, it's almost like keeping her there because you got so used to it. It's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? He associates it with his mom, so it's almost like keeping her there. Like it became like a normal part of your routine. It's like, this is a sound that's been a constant in your life for a while, probably for a couple years, and no, definitely for a couple years. And now it's like the quiet, it's it not being there. It just plays into her not being around anymore. I even thought it was beautiful. He came across that flower while he was driving, and he ended up taking a picture of it. And you see him later on, kind of mixing some stuff. He's trying to replicate the color of that flower. You know, I don't know whether that's probably like, I don't know if that's for what dish he's making that correlates to, but I think we're going to see that soon enough, like what that storyline is up like being trajectory wise. Let's go transition over to the Richie stuff, him with Ava, which I love the whole yeah, and she's like, oh, you're saying it kind of like Neil, because I remember that, because I'm sure they say it, but it's like I distinctly remember the whole Neil, Ted, and Michelle in like in the Fishes episode last season being like, yeah, like them doing that. I guess I never realized that that's kind of like specifically a Neil thing. Yeah, they didn't say it was a Ted thing. It does seem like it's a Neil thing, which I thought was kind of adorable. And like Richie and her doing that to each other. Yeah, I'm like, it's actually so adorable. And now it's like, right, having to explain the Frank of it all. You know, it's like, oh, like they're getting married, and it's like, well, what do I call him? And she's like, because I mean, he's not, you know, my uncle like Carmen. It's like, yo, and like there's layers to Richie saying the line of, well, no one's like Carmen. It's like, yeah, there's layers to that. Like that's kind of a backhanded statement that there's good and bad associated with that line. But it's like, yeah, you can call him whatever you want to, because it's like, yeah, that's going to be kind of your stepdad. And it's like, should I call him stepdad? Should I call him dad? It's kind of weird, you know? And it's like, oh, like Aunt Dee Dee's supposed to be coming to the wedding. And like Richie could not help but laugh. He's like, oh, he's like, okay. He couldn't help but laugh because it's like, oh man, that's good. Because he knows, he's like, oh, that's going to be a shit show in a lot of ways. I mean, we don't know how Dee Dee's been since the season 2 finale. We don't know like how, like in the time frame that's changed, like has anything changed? We know that Tiff has been around her. It's like, oh, like, wait, where'd you see Aunt Dee Dee? It's like, oh, she was with mom. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Apparently she's going to the wedding. Will she? I mean, it depends on how much of her family's going, because it's like Tip has been like family just like Richie is, even though they're not blood related. So I don't know what to kind of make of that. I'm curious to see how that wedding situation goes, because like maybe Donna will be better like not around like her own family. Maybe that would be I don't know what that environment's going to look like, but like I said, Richie laughing is funny. Because it's like, oh, there's dark humor to that. But also, Ava had pointed out, like, oh, mom said you're alone. He's like, did mom say I'm alone or lonely? She's like, I don't know. And it's like, to be fair, Richie is just kind of like Carmi is too. It's like, I mean, a lot of people are lonely right now. Because like, how many people have someone? Amongst the people we know, like, obviously, Nat has Pete. But also, like, we know Tina's potentially married. Once again, I thought that was her husband, but who knows? Maybe I'm mistaken. But what we saw in the episode was, who knows? But it's like, yeah, especially because, like, obviously when Tiff told him last season about her getting engaged to Frank, it kind of was like, you can tell, like, it hit him. Like, he's probably hoping, like, even though it had probably been some time, because we don't know how long him and Tiff have been split, but it's still got to be a situation of maybe on some level he was hoping things could be repaired, that he could fix it, but now it's like, well, Frank's engagement, like it's too late, you know, because even she kind of probably knew where Richie was coming from, considering she had a hard time telling him. So a lot of that kind of plays into this. It makes you go like, oh, is Richie going to find someone? Maybe this season, maybe not, because we have seen him go on one date in season 1, but that's about it. So we don't know what his love life situation really is. But later on, he drops Ava off to Frank's place. And I assume like him and Tiff are living together, and you're just like, what in the random Josh Hartnett? I was like, what the fuck? Once again, this show will just randomly drop actors on. You're like, what the that? Because they just dropped, because there's no fanfare or anything, which most shows don't do any fanfare, but it's still like, holy shit, that's Josh Hartnett. What the fuck? I was like, that I wasn't expecting you to be Frank. I don't know. I didn't even think we'd see Frank. But it's like, yeah, from time to time they'll reference characters and then you'll randomly see them. It's like, yeah, like Lee was dropped in like episode 1 of last season, and then like, oh, lo and behold, we get to episode 6, fucking Bob Odenkirk, you know? So it's like, it's stuff like that. Person they keep referencing all the time, especially amongst the facts, because I forgot to talk about this in episode 2, is they reference, was it Francine, the one that, it's not just Michelle, like, because, I mean, we definitely know that Nat has beef with her, but Michelle had beef with her too, so, but, you know, Ted and Neil are constantly defending their sister, like, no, she's good, so it's like, because we still don't know what it is that she did that, like, I don't know if, like, Michelle hates her for the same reason Nat does, or is there different reasons, but, like, Nat's always just kind of being like, oh yeah, Francine's like, she's a fuck or whatever. Like, she just gets super pissed anytime their sister's brought up. So, like, the fact is, I'm like, when we meet her, she's going to be maybe it's going to be an actress I'm familiar with. That's all, you know, because the famousness of an actor is always going to be relative to the person. Because it's like, if you've seen him enough. So, like, when I'm marking out, being like, holy shit, it's Josh Hartnett, because I'm familiar with Josh Hartnett. So, you know, there's other actors where you probably be like, oh, like, they've been doing plenty of work. It's just, I might not be so. So I'm curious, is it going to be someone I know? Or is it going to be some... Because, like, you know, because it's like I said, with Fishes, it's just kind of like, yo, what the fuck with all these, like, random actors. But it's like, it's relative. Like, how many people know John Mulaney? How many people know Gillian Jacobs? How many people know, you know, Bob Odenkirk, you know? So it's stuff like that where you're like, they're famous enough, but it's also famous relative to people. Because it's like, yeah, like, how many people know you as kind of like a household name where you're just, like, immediately like, oh my God, that's Sarah Paulson. Like, you know? How many people immediately would do, you know? So that's why I was bringing up where, like, the sister and bringing it back to the Josh Hartnett of it all. But yeah, like, he was like kind of nervous talking to Richie, and I was like, what the like, even I was like, yo, dude, Frank, spit it out. What the fuck are you, like, feeling bad about? And the thing he's feeling bad about, he's like, I should have come to you about, you know, before I popped the question to Tiff. And he's like, I'm not her father. Like, why would you? He's like, yeah. But, like, the fact of the matter is, like, your daughter's great. Tiff is amazing. And he's just like, yeah, I didn't want things to be weird between us. So he feels like, as a gentleman, like, I should have, like, approached you. It's like, I was like, what is the decorum? I mean, I don't think there is a guidebook on, like, what to do when you're popping question to a woman. And it's because I'm like, I don't know if Frank and Richie have history for him to be like, oh, I should have approached you. I mean, there has to be enough history there for him to be like, yo, I should have talked to you. Where it's like, if Richie meant nothing to him, like, why would you even feel the need to why would you feel guilty about not saying anything to him? Because Richie's not understanding it either. But I'm like, I said, what is, like, oh, like, I'm marrying someone that's gotten divorced. I was like, you're supposed to, is the decorum to meet with the ex? I'm like, hey, I want to let you know that I'm marrying your ex. And it's like, okay. Like, unless you're homies, there's a homie code to that. So that's why I'm like, what is Frank and Richie's, like, friendship level? They must be decent enough for that to be a thing of, like, I don't know. That was just kind of interesting to me. But he's like, yeah, like, I want us to be good. I don't want things to be awkward because we're going to be obviously spending time together. So he's like, oh, like, right, you also look great, Richie. He's like, yeah. So, yeah, I heard about the Bears doing great. Like, I'd love for you to invite us over. It's like, yeah, you'll get invited over when it's perfect. You know, and Richie really, really means that because he wants to put his best foot forward when it comes to that whole situation in a lot of ways. So I just thought that whole sequence was interesting, and it does beg the question of, like, what is the proper decorum when you? But like I said, homie wise, there's a homie code, I guess. But you know, it might be an unwritten rule in the homie code about marrying someone's ex. You know, maybe it's a difference of, well, this person was dating this person versus, like, oh, they were married. And then you're now marrying that, you know, I'm sure there's layers to that situation, how you should respond and handle it. But yeah, even Richie stopped wearing his ring because I think it finally, like, solidified. I think, no, because that was earlier, even before he met with Frank. It was when Ava was saying all that stuff, and it's just kind of like, I think it was finally said, like, right, I got to stop living in the past. I got to let go, keep moving forward. So we have that. I also love the conversation that Richie had with Nat. where, you know, she's obviously dealing with stuff, like Pete's going to be out of town for like a week and a half or something like that, and the baby's coming in 2 weeks, and it's just, you could tell she's nervous about it. I mean, she even brought that up in episode 2 about the feelings about that, and she hasn't, I doubt she's really talked to Pete about it, but her and Richie had this whole conversation. I've actually never knew what those Zen gardens really represent. I thought that was so beautiful. Because I've always thought like they aesthetically they look neat, but I've never known like the underlying message of what they are. It's like, right, the rocks are supposed to be people, and it's supposed to represent the fact that we're so separated, you know. And I'm sure that's even more poignant with where everyone currently is. But it's like, oh, Nat, how did you know that? It's like because Pete likes a certain movie or something. Like, oh, Pete's kind of a movie guy. And basically, you have because it was like. Richie had referenced like, oh yeah, a director of his a favorite director of his talked about it, and it seems like him and Pete have that connection. Because we know Carmy and Pete are in a better place. We don't know where Richie and Pete currently stand, especially with like all the changes Richie's going through last season. We have no idea how that correlates with his dynamic and relationship. Because he's made amends a lot with Nat, and obviously they're in a good spot. Like the conversations they have are dope, but we don't know how that translates over to someone like Pete. But so they had that whole conversation, which I thought was interesting. And obviously also like a little bit of like, yeah, the money situation sucks. We're like, if it's like, oh, so did we kind of come out on top this week? It's like, yeah, tomorrow we would have. It's like, fuck, it's like, yep, another day, $5,000 short. It's like, dude, like Cicero's going to jump on my back about this. But anyway, Nat talks about, you know, some concerns she has because she's like, I'm so worried about, you know, how to not let what's happening for the baby to like what's happening in my head to affect her. And once again, you can tell how complicated that is for Nat. And once again, being a mom, considering her relationship with her own mom, and just I think she's concerned with everything of like, right, I don't want to be my mom. Everything that's going on with the bear, it's like, how do I make sure my shit doesn't affect my child? And I think that's every parent, because every person has shit they're dealing with, and it's like, how do I not let that affect my child? And even Richie's like, I think about that all the time, and it's like, I don't have a solution. And he asks her, like, have you figured it out? And she's like, no, I haven't figured it out either, you know? And he talks about, like, Ava asked me if I was alone, or like, asked me if she thinks I'm alone. Because he was even suggesting, like, maybe I would be better, because everyone talks about how great Frank is, how he's this shit, like, maybe I would be better to not confuse her and kind of pull away. But Nat's like, no, the weird thing would be you not being in her, like, because at the end of the day, you are her dad. Like, Frank, yeah, there can be like a relationship there, but it's like Richie kind of feels like it's almost playing into that purposelessness he felt. I mean, it was there in season 1, but he really defined it in season 2, that feeling like he's lost his purpose, and he's now feeling like, I've lost my place in so many places. And he even says, like, he apologized to Nat, being like, I always inserted myself in places I wasn't supposed to, just to kind of fit in. And he's kind of worried that's happening there. But it's like, no, like, this is where you're supposed to be. You need to be. Like, don't bail out of your daughter's life. Not bail out, but just kind of take a step back and just let Tiff and Frank kind of be a family. Like, maybe I'm causing more issues by being around. But it's like, no, you not being around would be more of an issue. And then it's just kind of like the conversation of, are you alone? And he quickly changes subject, and you see Nat kind of clock that. But it's like, yeah, like, I think for Richie, he was never alone because of that whole, like, interjecting himself into other people's families. But he's also, like, other than interacting with Carmy and Nat at the restaurant, like, who knows how much interaction he has with the family in general, you know, and the interactions he has with Jimmy, that's about it. But like, that's all in the confines of work. Outside of that, who does Richie have outside of that? Like, we don't really see him. I mean, to be fair, we don't see anyone here interact with anyone outside of work. So I'm like, what is anyone's social life here? It's like, can you even have one working in a restaurant? But also, it's like, once again, his best friend is dead, you know, and just shit really hit the fan for Richie the moment Mikey died. And it's just kind of like, yeah, without that person who, Mikey, once again, he was big, he was loud, and Richie always kind of adopted that person. I mean, Richie's big and loud too, but it's like, he lost a little bit of that oomph without his best friend around. And it's like, Mikey always had that gravitational personality, so there would always be people around Richie, I think, in that capacity. And maybe, who knows, like, what Mikey's, like, circle was like with, you know, when he, like, would draw people in, would that draw, you know, would people get drawn around while Richie was around too. And so stuff like that was just kind of really interesting. So we have that. We have this situation, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's just kind of a single like scene thing with Tina where she is picking up like groceries from a place, but it's like, yeah, farm wise, it's like, yes, we're not getting as many like vegetables grown, like the time frame to grow vegetables is shorter and shorter, so it's like you can't even get a lot of vegetables. Well, you used to be able to get a lot of stuff at this one place, you kind of have to go to multiple places now. And the guy said something that really spoke to Tina, where he was like, basically, I forgot the metaphor now. It's kind of like, it's basically a whole giant metaphor for growing together, which feels like it fits very personal. Personally, it feels like it fits so beautifully with the whole Zen garden thing that Richie was talking about. So we kind of have that. So I feel like that's probably going to be a through line for Tina, maybe trying to push maybe more so of them growing together. So that was kind of interesting. But let's circle over to Sid, who is moving into a new place. Her dad's not too happy about it because the place is small, it's expensive, it's further from the restaurant. It's kind of like a, hey, stay with me, save up some money, you can find a different spot. But she's like, you don't want me to move out. There's an element of that, but because it's like, right, you're just going to keep making excuses. Like, no place is ever going to be good enough. You know, so I just kind of have to pull the trigger on it. That's why she's like, yeah, too bad, Dad. I already have the keys. I already signed the lease. And he's just kind of like, oh boy, you know. But he had talked about the walls. He's like, yeah, these walls are thin, just like that partnership agreement. Because Sid lied and was like, yeah, like Nat, they're figuring out Nat hasn't sent it over because she doesn't know, like, with everything being what it is, she doesn't know if she's ready to commit to this, because every season it's been something bumpy. Season 1, it hasn't been kosher. Season 2, it hasn't been kosher. It feels like, it always feels like it's going there, but it never quite gets there. And I think she's concerned, like, it's so interesting because her dad was like, I want you to not take things too fast. She is taking things slow because she is so unsure. And like, they haven't said anything. They're not pushing her to sign things because she's trying to figure things out. But like, once again, lying to her dad that they haven't sent it over. It's there in her mailbox. She's just lying about it. So I thought that was interesting. So we have that element to it. But yeah, she's with Carmen and like, they're doing I forgot what it was they were cutting up, but the whole conversation was about him making a change to the menu. She's like, you told Nat to print out the menu, but here you are changing the menu last second, which made me go like, wait, so after last episode, are we moving away from changing the menu every week? Or is it like a thing of we have it set up of like, oh, this is Monday's menu, this is Tuesday's menu, so on and so forth, and they're printing them out, and he's like, oh, this is up, I'm changing for Tuesday's menu. Like, I don't know if that's what that's a reference to, or whether it is like a, oh no, Carmen was like, nah, we need to pull back, and we are only going to do a specific menu for now. That's why I'm like, I don't know what that feels like. That could be interpreted either way. But Sid's bringing up, like, right, your communication is bad. Because she's like, at any point in time, did you tell anyone that you were going to change anything on the menu? And he was like, nah, bad communication. She's like, see, that's the only point I'm making. I think it's interesting that the moment he's, like, referencing, like, oh, you got the place? She's like, yeah, I did. He's like, oh, that's cool. What's your dad think about it? In that moment, she cuts her finger. It's like, yeah, it's interesting, like, both sides of her life where it's like, oh, how'd your dad feel about the place? It's like, well, he doesn't like it, but, you know, because that's also in relation with, oh, he doesn't like the place because it's also, the walls are thin, and that correlates with the business agreement we have, which he's not too copacetic about. I mean, let's not forget he's also one of the people that pushed the whole element of, hey, don't you do you trust your partner? And that came into question a lot last season, and now she's questioning a lot more this season too in that regard. So, but it's also like, right, she also lied to her, like I said, she lied to her dad about the agreement. So it's just both sides of her life are kind of like, oh, like, how does this other side of your life feel about things? And you're just not. You're kind of keeping them separate, even though you can't for long. Eventually that's going to collide, and what the end result is going to be, it's going to be interesting. So just thought that was kind of a whole interesting conversation, just an interesting dynamic for Sid to kind of have this episode. So other than that, we had the whole situation with Ted and Neil, which I love, where Ted and Neil were working on like some photos, and they brought Carmi in, and I love, they're like, help. It reminds me of that thing on TikTok, once again, like weird trends, the whole like, oh, you're so calm and collected, help, somebody help, like that stuff. I'm not doing it, I'm also further from the microphone while I'm doing that, well, my phone, because that's what I'm recording these on, but it's like, you've seen the TikToks, it's so fucked, but it's like, there is something funny about there, just someone just like, I mean, in the moment it's not funny, but it's like someone doing a blood curdling like scream, but just like help, like someone's getting murdered and needs an emergency, like help. It kind of felt like that the way Neil was saying it. But yeah, they brought Carmi in. It's like, cool. These are all these reviewers, photos, got background on people and stuff like that, which I thought was hilarious. Of like, oh yeah, this person went to jail for stealing some stuff, but even while they were in jail, they did reviews of the food in prison. I was like, that's fucking it. It's like, oh, this person's an influencer. I think, no, like that was the same person, like, oh, she's an influencer, but she's a bad influence. It was a whole thing, and they've got all this background on people. It's like, right, this way, when reviewers are coming in, we can keep an eye out on them, because you don't want to get blindsided like you did episode 6, which led into the situation to episode 7 of season 1. So, trying to prepare for it. Even Carmi saying like, I don't like this feeling. They're like, what feeling? And he's like, I don't know. But he's like, yeah, good work. And it's like, oh, did you hear that? It's like, yeah, we did such a good job. It's like, yeah, I'm so proud of us. And he's like, Carmi's asking Ted to help Ibra like cut up some bread. And it's like, oh, I think Carmen's like, what was the word he was looking for? He was like, oh yeah, I think Carmen's like trusted me more or something like that. And Fac was like, no, he's not. He's like, no, it seems like he's like, no, if like Carmi's got a lot to remember, and that's what I'm here for. I would remember. So if he was really feeling that way, he would have told me, and I would have told you. And the fact is, I haven't told you means Carmi doesn't feel that way. He's like, oh, okay. But it's like Ted and Neil's relationship is so good. I'm curious what their relationship is like. How many other, like, once again, we have to meet the sister, but I'm curious how many of the other siblings there are. I mean, not of there are, because we know, as Richie said in like episode 2, he's like 8. Well, no, 9. I always forget. I think he said I always forget. Avery or whatever. So how many other siblings other than sister? Once again, we have to meet the sister. And how many other the Fac siblings are we going to meet? So there's all of that. Which that whole Ibra thing I thought was interesting too, where home dude, what's his name, like Christopher, was kind of giving him a heads up. He's like, yo, like Ibra, like if I were you, I would kind of like the basket thing, they're just going to abuse it, so you need to toss it. He was like, who was he referencing when he was like, yo, he was referencing Chucky. I don't know if that was supposed to be, no, because he was like, it was me, so-and-so, it was Mikey on the register. But I was like, who the fuck is Chucky? That's why I was confused. I was like, who the fuck is, I was about to, well, it's not Carmi, because Carmi never worked at a restaurant. So I was like, who the fuck is Chucky? Maybe that I was. Is that supposed to be? It's not. That's not supposed to be Richie, is it? I don't know. I was like, who the fuck is that supposed to be? But he was kind of giving Ibra advice. He's like, yeah, it was kind of basically it was a well-oiled machine like General Hospital. He's like, Ibra's like, yeah, I worked at a hospital once. He was like, oh really? It's like, yeah, many people died, and he's just like, yo, that's morbid, man. It's like Ibra always be saying some random crazy shit where you're like, what the fuck are you talking about, Ibra? But either way. So, with all of that, we have the ending of the episode, which ties into the Neil stuff, which I love so much, because there was a whole conversation of like, well, we got to keep an eye out on these people. But then Ted said, yeah, but what if they've already been here? And Neil's like, no, they wouldn't have, because I already pre-memorized all of this. I've got their faces now, but I already had it pre-memorized. So, like, none of them have been to the restaurant. It comes in twofold. One, the fact is we had Sid run into Adam, who works at Ever, which I didn't realize, like, Adam, like, he's just playing himself because like, he's an actor, but he also cooks, too. So I guess he's almost like an inverse of the Maddie situation a little bit. How Maddie is, like, the only one of the cast who actually is a cook. So I don't know whether, like, Adam's situation as a cook predated him being in the show. Once again, he's the dude I always go back to as, like, fuck you, Garrett. Yes, fuck me, chef. You know, that whole situation. Once again, we also saw in episode 1, he studied under Terry along with Luca and Carmi. But he was like, yeah, he apparently slipped in 2 weeks ago at the restaurant, and because Sid was like, whoa, when the fuck did you get, like, someone how'd you get by like Richie and Carmi? He's like, yeah, Carmi and Richie were like yelling at each other, so like they probably didn't even know. He's like, yeah, I was with friends. He's like, other than that, the vibe was excellent. The food, he specifically referenced the dish, and it's like, oh yeah, he's like, it was so not Carmi, and she's like, no, but we kind of worked on it together. He's like, I know it's kind of like mainly you, Sid, but he's like, yeah, it was excellent, it was great. It's like, oh, what issues were you having? She is like, inherited issues. It's like, I feel you on that. So, but that's kind of a symptom of a larger issue that it's like, cool, last episode was not great. So it's like, okay, like it wasn't the family and friends night that was season 2's finale. It's like all that time that was passing in episode 2, not episode 2, last episode, episode 3, it's like you slipped in there and none of us knew. That sucks. And that coincides with the Neil thing of like, oh yeah, I've got eyes, I've got this all pre-memorized, and then later on, Nat got a call being like, yo, why is the Tribune like trying to get like photos of the restaurant? And then she says, I think it was Carmi that was like, shit. It's like, whoa, why is Carmi saying shit? I was like, did he forget something? But then Sid explains, it means that they're here because it's like, it's not because we're about to get like a review is coming out, and so they need photos for the review. And it's like, wait, so it's like, I don't know if it's a person needs photos from the review or it correlates with the review, but it's like, it means that someone's already come here and reviewed us. So it kind of ties into Neil not realizing like maybe some of the people he prepared, maybe there was someone else that he didn't pre-memorize, or was it just kind of like meant to be the thing of like, no, it was someone he quote unquote pre-memorized had slipped in there. So it's like, cool, someone could have been in here at any point during episode 3, which was a shit show in a lot of ways on multiple days. So it's like, oh boy. So that's kind of the note we leave on. And once again, it feels so poetic to kind of bring it full circle considering everything with Sid and the review from last season. So like that shit kind of plays a little differently because it wasn't even Sid giving the food to a reviewer. It's just like, yo, a reviewer slipped in and none of us knew. So we should have been more on top of that. So very, very interesting development. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.